Good morning and welcome everyone to the second webinar in STB and Klook's webinar series. My name is Sarah. I am the Director of Marketing for Klook in Singapore, Malaysia and Indonesia, and I will be your host and moderator for today's session. So before we begin today's session, I would like to just run through a few housekeeping rules. As we have over 200 attendees for today's webinar, we seek your understanding as we will be muting everyone. But to make things a little bit more interactive, there will be polls conducted during the course of the webinar. When these polls are made, they will appear on screen and you can vote your answers by clicking on them. There will also be a Q&A discussion with our speaker, Marcus, after his presentation. So please feel free to leave your questions along the way by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Lastly, with all things live, we ask for your patience if we do experience any technical difficulties during this webinar, and have trust in us that we will try our best to rectify any issues should they occur. So now with the housekeeping out of the way, once again, we'd like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday morning to the Singapore Tourism Board and Klook webinar series. So today's webinar is entitled Keep the Fire of Travel Burning in the New Normal. We will be focusing on changes in consumer behaviors and trends in the COVID-19 world and how businesses can better market and connect with travelers in the new normal. So before we begin, we are actually pleased to have Ms. Lynette Pang, Assistant Chief Executive of STB's Marketing Group, give her opening remarks. Lynette should be a familiar name and face to most of you on this call, being responsible for building the Singapore destination brand globally. She helms the international marketing efforts of STB, driving the consumer-centric and yield-driven approach to marketing. Specifically, Lynette runs marketing across both the B2C, leisure, and B2B MICE businesses, which includes product and industry marketing, brand, advertising, digital and social, communications, and research across 20 markets. She also oversees global strategic marketing partnerships, corporate communications, and marketing capability development for the organization. In 2017, Lynette launched the Passion Made Possible brand, which signaled a shift for destination marketing towards an authentic view of Singapore through the voices of local craftsmen, artists, and personalities. Here's Lynette's welcome message to kick off today's session.
Hello, this is Lynette Pang from the Singapore Tourism Board. Welcome to the STB Klook webinar series on what's next for travel in the new normal. It will be some time before we can fully welcome tourists back to Singapore. However, we have to continue to engage our customers and make sure they choose our products when they are ready to travel again. It's important to understand how consumer behavior and needs have changed due to COVID-19 and redesign the customer experience and marketing to meet those needs. This is why the STB Marketing College has partnered Klook to provide free webinars to help our tourism stakeholders and marketeers upskill and to win new customers. I hope you will find the webinar useful. Do stay safe and have a good learning journey ahead.
With that, we are very pleased to welcome today's speaker, Marcus Yong, who will be sharing with us more on today's topic. A little bit more about Marcus. As Klook's Vice President of Marketing for APAC, Marcus drives the travel activities booking platform's customer acquisition and marketing efforts. He is responsible for growing the brand's presence and bookings amongst the rapidly growing FIT, or Free and Independent Traveller segment across the Asia-Pacific region. Prior to joining Klook in 2016, Marcus was the digital marketing lead for Scoot, where he charted the airline's global digital acquisition efforts and management of their notoriously quirky social media presence across 7 markets in the region. Marcus first started his career at the Singapore Economic Development Board, focusing on the digital brand and channel management for North America. A born and bred Singaporean, Marcus subscribes to the 80-20 mantra of 80% pure, unadulterated hard work and 20% thinking of the next big thing. Despite being a digital native, he enjoys reading good old paperbacks about growth, hacking, and disruption. So please feel free to ask him questions about that. With that, I would like to invite Marcus to join us on this webinar.
Hi, thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is well, safe, ready to spend the next hour or so with myself, where I will be talking a little bit about how we can keep the fire of travel burning in the new normal. When the team first proposed this title to me, I had some concerns because I was thinking, how exactly do we make a webinar that passionate and that theory, right? So we decided to really pepper it with, examples, some case studies, and also some polls along the way. So, sit back and, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them across as well. So today we'll talk a little bit about three things. One is the shift to domestic tourism. Number two is what we call the new travel era 2.0. And then share a little bit about Klook's multi-stage recovery plans and some of the initiatives that we've put in place. A little bit about Klook first. Today we are present in about 29 offices around the world, and we have raised slightly over $500 million of funding from notable investors such as Matrix Partners, Sequoia, SoftBank Vision Fund, and TCV. Speed, agility, localization, these are things that we believe very strongly in. And most of the marketing work that you see that we do, right, from content to social media, performance marketing, data analytics, everything is done in-house with our best-in-class teams based all around the world. I guess one could say that we are a global company with a local soul and heart. And that's one of the ingredients that really helped us propel hyper growth, in key markets like Singapore within our first few years of operations. So I guess now we have our first poll, right, Sarah?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Marcus, for the quick introduction to Klook. With that, we want to get everyone warmed up with our very first poll question, which should be appearing on your screen shortly. I think this is a question that's on everyone's lips. What is your prediction for travel recovery in the next 6 months? Domestic travel, travel bubbles, or regional travel? Please key your answers in the poll that should be popping up on your screen. Marcus, any hints as to what your prediction will be?
Well, personally, I'm looking forward to maybe doing a staycation. So I don't know if that's a very obvious hint. But I am looking forward to, perhaps going to Bali, chilling on the beach soon as well. Yeah, so interested to see what everyone's answers are.
Okay, I think we should have the poll results in already. So maybe we can close the poll and take a look at the results. Okay, so majority of the audience actually voted for domestic travel. So 69% or close to 70% is domestic travel, while 24% and 7% respectively are looking forward to travel bubbles and regional travel. So in the next slide, I think Marcus will kind of go through what we feel will be the new normal in the next couple of months.
Indeed, for starters, we believe that recovery for the travel space will be sure. It will be steady, but it will probably start with domestic travel, and that looks likely to stay, for a little while at least. And why is that the case is, international flights will take some time to recover. It's not only due to scheduling, but consumer readiness in general. As a matter of fact, no set of international standards have yet been set, and airlines are at this stage self-enforcing guidelines such as obligatory mask usage, temperature checks, and of course, longer queues for passengers due to safety reasons. At Klook, we believe that recovery will happen in stages, and it is subjected to how soon travel restrictions can be lifted, as well as bilateral government relations. This chart that you see on screen here will give a better representation of what I mean, where right now, most markets are still in phase 1.1, 1.2, starting with home on the left and their immediate city, depending on local lockdown restrictions and the opening of businesses. Whereas in markets like Taiwan, Vietnam, Korea, and China, they have managed to control the situation better, and locals can start to seek out short domestic trips between cities or states. And as confidence increases, as travel corridors start opening up, people will start flying regionally and revisiting places perceived to be safer for short getaways before finally taking longer trips across time zones, across borders, eventually in phase 3. Now, according to a recent survey by the World Tourism Organization, different regions will experience varying degrees of recovery at overlapping times. Domestic travel is likely to lead the way to Q4 2020 or even early 2021. And experts have also forecasted that the APAC, Europe, Middle East regions are likely to experience some recovery this year, whereas the Americas are probably likely to take a little bit longer. And if you look at Google search trends, they also point to some very positive signs where early demand signals around staycation, flights, car rentals are starting to pick up slowly but surely. This is also echoed by Klook's internal data. So we've seen about 60% of the total number of Klook searches across APAC and Europe in Q2 are related to domestic experiences. People want to explore their own cities and countries for leisure and basically just get out of the house. So with international travel looking uncertain, Singaporeans are naturally beginning to turn to domestic experiences. With the earlier months of pent-up demand, staying indoors, the circuit breaker, everyone will be extra eager to turn to the next accessible and available option, which is what we call domestic experiences. But it won't be easy because unlike larger countries, I don't think going from Changi to Tuas necessarily counts as domestic tourism. And of course, everyone speaks a lot about these travel bubbles, right? For example, we've heard about Singapore, Malaysia, we've heard about Australia, New Zealand. These are definitely very promising things that we're looking forward to. But as I mentioned earlier, it's very much dependent on bilateral government relations as to when some of these travel bubbles can open. And furthermore, when these bubbles start or these green corridors start opening up, it is very likely that essential travel, such as business travel, medical, will take priority over leisure trips, at least for the start. So I say this boldly, I say this confidently, that travel will resume, but not the one that we knew from before. And this is what we call the new travel era, as countries emerge from lockdown and we all move collectively towards the new normal. So here are 5 summary trends we have identified based on our internal data and external reports. We'll go through each one very briefly in the next couple of slides. So firstly, you have the rise of small groups, families, and FITs. Sarah, could you go one slide back first? Yeah. And people generally avoiding large gatherings. Then you have younger people venturing out first. We have the concept of day trips and staycations, people's preference for outdoor-based activities, and lastly, an increased focus on new health and safety standards. So now we'll go through each of them in a little bit more detail. So even before COVID-19, the trend for smaller group travel has always been on the rise among Asia travelers generally. And last year, when Klook conducted our solo travel survey, 76% of people have either traveled alone or are considering it. And the survey found that 71% of Singaporeans indicate that they have either done it or are thinking about doing so. And when we ask them, what are the reasons why you want to fly solo? About 66% of them said, I just want to escape from my daily routine, right? And more than about 59% wanted to really have that uninterrupted me time. So this is definitely a trend that we see catching on. So COVID-19 has accelerated the need for tour operators or providers to ensure that they now cater for smaller group itineraries or experiences because people are starting to become more selective about the environment that they want to interact with outside of home. A recent McKinsey report on traveler behaviors showed that smaller groups are now more popular, with about 31% of respondents likely to choose that if you present that as an option to them. And that's nearly triple the percentage shown from 2019, where the concept of solo, me time, small intimate groups were probably not as important. Now, in terms of people heading out first, younger travelers are likely to make up the first wave of the industry's rebound, according to the World Travel and Tourism Council. And they said that people aged 18 to 35 who appear less vulnerable to COVID-19 will be among the first to start traveling again. And I think in Singapore, the same trend can be observed. This wanderlust spirit is well and alive among Singaporeans, with majority having plans to travel this year once travel restrictions lift. So there was a survey conducted by Singapore's mobile wallet, Utrip, called the Travel Intent Survey, and they polled about 6,000 Singaporeans, and they found that more than half of the respondents have plans to travel in 2020 the moment travel restrictions lift. And of that number, millennial travelers, those aged 25 to 34, are actually the most adventurous and the most likely to go out first. So businesses should ensure that they are then able to connect with these users via the right channels and know that millennials and young adults, this group, they value new experiences as a form of social currency more than ever, beyond the homogeneous cookie cutter type of offerings that some brands may have been used to offering in the past. So as cross-border travel takes time to recover, people are venturing out again, but they're staying closer to home with day trips and staycations gaining in popularity. This thing about staycations, we first launched this category in Hong Kong, and we saw great momentum due to the property spaciousness and good hygiene standards. Everyone knows that Hong Kong is notorious for having very small apartments, right? So the moment the ability to let you go to a nicer hotel, to have a different environment, people really lapped it up. And we at Klook have since launched similar offerings in other recovering locations, such as Thailand, Taiwan, South Korea, even Singapore. Today, we are working with over 100 hotel brands and properties to curate such offerings for our users. In fact, I think Sarah herself just did a staycation over the last weekend. So we also see that travelers are leaning more towards outdoor-based activities as they avoid indoor queues and crowds. In fact, when Chinese travelers first ventured out domestically in May, and that was during the Labor Day holiday, a survey in 8 cities showed that outdoor scenic travel actually ranked the most popular. And when we look at search data from Google, we also put keywords such as fishing, hiking, cycling as some of the most searched for outdoor activities for May in North Asia. So this trend for the great outdoors is also reflected in Klook's internal data. So we saw much higher demand, right, with people wanting to get outdoors and try new experiences. Looking at, say, Taiwan, for example, nature-based experiences such as boat rides, hiking, diving in Penghu, these continue to see very strong page views and bookings beyond the usual attractions and theme parks. And last but not least, we are seeing an increased emphasis on new hygiene and public safety standards as people become more selective of what and how they are exposing themselves. The World Travel and Tourism Council recently laid out new guidelines for the travel sector with an extensive framework to help governments and businesses work together for testing, for contact tracing. And countries like Singapore and Thailand have also launched new initiatives to prepare their country's operators and stakeholders in adopting good hygiene and safety standards to raise confidence for the return of tourism. In fact, just yesterday, Lynette herself, STB did an announcement about the risk assessment framework for businesses conferences to resume in Singapore. So that's definitely one of the direction and trends that we see in terms of having more governance and standards on hygiene and public health safety. So at Klook, we have seen that private transport can also reap the benefit of new safety standards as consumers have difficulty moving from point to point, especially with restrictions as well as some conceptions, right, placed on public transport about the crowd, the distancing. So the example that you see here on screen is our COVID-19 prevention private airport pickup service at Incheon Airport. So this is in Korea, Seoul. That includes the following enhanced measures to prevent infections. And this has taken off really quite well with our Korean customers, especially during the recent Labor Day holiday as well as summer in terms of both bookings and conversion rates. So here's a quick recap of the trends and insights we just covered. The hunger for travel remains. It is just shifting into new areas as part of the new travel era 2.0. So while waiting for travel to resume, what should we focus on in the next few months? And this is something that I hear very, often from stakeholders, from partners, right? In a survival situation, in the reopening situation, what can we do? We can't possibly, just keep waiting indefinitely. And that's very true. So for starters, let's try redirecting people's travel or leisure budgets to local experiences. According to our global travel intention study conducted a while back, Singaporeans actually have one of the highest trip expenditures, averaging more than $2,000 per trip and making approximately 4 trips per year. Now, that's $8,000 set aside per annum, also factoring in the fact that people need an outlet, they have leave to clear, they need to relax, They need to have fun, but they need to do so in a more safe and more measured way. The goal then is to ensure that they spend a fraction of that, at least, on local experience that would otherwise have been low on the consideration list in the past. So take a step back, reevaluate your focus and priorities, and ask yourselves, what does the Singapore customer look like for your business? There is a common saying that Singaporeans are one of the toughest crowds to please in the world, but also the most vocal when not treated well. But jokes aside, no longer can we take that cookie cutter homogeneous approach, because right now, every business, everyone is competing for the same share of voice. There's not a lot of options in terms of people being able to go out, go to different countries. So, and then when we cross-match demographically, you have couples, you have families, you have friends, and psychographically, there are different tribes from your value seekers, which are people who are always looking for the best deal, to the foodies, to fans of the great outdoors. I mean, have you seen how crowded our parks are these days? And also the weekend warriors needing a break from the daily hustle. So have a little bit of that framework. And when you cross segment and match, there are so many permutations that you can tailor your products and your messages that fit your business objective. And you can even rotate them, right? Upcoming, say Father's Day is coming, what can you do? For certain festive occasions, you can always rotate the kind of audience that you want to go after in terms of your marketing message or your outreach. So to help everyone get started, here are 3 areas that you can consider. Number 1, new priorities to communicate. Number 2, new ways to engage. And number 3, new products for the domestic customer. So on new priorities to communicate, earlier, if you recall, one of the 5 trends I shared was that safety is one of them. And I am pretty sure this will definitely be a top of mind priority for many consumers seeking domestic fun, especially those with families, maybe with older members that they want to have an experience with, outside of home. So always strike a balance between the practical side of consumers versus the inspirational side. Now, you don't have to make your content super sterile because it loses its luster, but neither should you go the extreme of being all shiny but irresponsible. On the practical side, provide assurances that it is safe to visit your establishment, that you have taken the right precautions, and also demonstrate the kind of savings or value adds that your customers can enjoy in times like that. On the inspiration side, be innovative, try new angles, try and own also that much coveted weekend slot, because that lead up to Saturday, Sunday, Thursday, Friday are where people are starting to think, what can I do this weekend? I'm not able to travel. Where can I bring my family as well? So safety is here to stay. That's a fact. And here's an example of how we were able to work with one of our merchants, in this case, Hong Kong Disneyland, to feature their hygiene-related measures and append that to the activity booking page, so that customers who come to the page, they are well educated, they are well updated, and they're well assured. So mentioning things like having the reduced number of visitors, their cleaning methodologies, social distancing, what are the hand washing facilities available, these all go a very long way in building consumer confidence, and they complement, right, the booking page itself, because it's not a page just full of safety measures, but it is there when consumers really need the ability to tell if this experience or this merchant has done the right steps in order to receive me back. I cannot stress on the importance actually of investing in good content creation and marketing these days. Because of the pandemic, people are definitely more cautious. They are more deliberate in how they plan. I don't think they are so much just looking for deals and discounts, but they are really prioritizing quality and discovery. So whether you own a blog, a Facebook page, or whether you're one of Klook's partners that you can co-create stories with us, now is the time to connect with your customers very meaningfully. So on the screen here, you can see examples of how the Klook team was able to work with some of our partners, push out content about new safety measures, very localized angles on how we can explore our backyard, and also things like, let's make every weekend count.
Okay, so before Marcus goes into the next section of the presentation around new ways of engagement, we wanted to do another quick poll with everyone on the call. Could we have the next poll up, please? So the next question is, which of the following channels are you most keen to try for your brand, but face difficulties implementing? TikTok, Telegram, live streaming, or the last option is, I think what I'm doing right now for marketing is sufficient. So please feel free to put your answers in. Marcus, what do you think has been the most exciting trend that you've seen recently in the market?
Personally, I've seen a lot of live streaming, and I wanted to say TikTok, right? Because something very funny happened. My mom asked me last weekend, "Hey son, what is this TikTok? Can you teach me?" And I was very, very surprised. But that aside, I have actually seen a lot of businesses really embrace live streaming. We've seen, durian sellers going online. We've seen like wet market hawkers trying to hawk their wares using live streaming. So I would go with live streaming.
Okay, let's see what the rest of the attendees think. Okay, it seems that most of the attendees actually agree with you, with 50% of them wanting to implement live streaming as part of their business. TikTok comes in second with 36% of the vote, Telegram 8%, and 6% think that what they're doing right now is sufficient. So we are in luck because the next section of the presentation will focus a little bit more on live streaming. Yeah.
Cool. So maybe you can go one slide back first.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So I think secondly, as what Sarah mentioned, brands can think of new ways to engage consumers by better understanding how COVID has changed consumer behavior. And the examples that were brought up, TikTok, live streaming, these are great examples of how consumer behavior has changed as a result of the pandemic. So I want to share a recent example or case study we did called Klook Home. Despite the lockdown in markets, we knew that people's innate curiosity to discover, to see more of the world will always remain. And COVID-19 might have affected their ability to move freely, but it does not stop people from staying curious and seeing what's out there, even if it means exploring the world from their homes. So through Klook Home, consumers were able to book anything from DIY home kits, meals, hobby kits to their house. And the market response was overwhelmingly good. So, we featured almost 200 home-based experiences. And in the span of 2 months, we've seen more than 2,000 bookings. We generated over 360 pieces of coverage in media outlets all across our markets with an estimated reach of about 281 million. So it was something that was very positively received, and the team had a lot of fun in doing this, even together with some of our merchant partners. So part of Klook Home also involved what we called virtual interactive experiences, which was a 4-part live streaming effort to showcase virtual interactive experiences. So we brought our consumers and we brought people online to Spain to look at Casa Bayo. We brought them to a vineyard in the US, to Indonesia for Bali Safari, and then to the UK as well. And in total, we garnered over 670,000 video views in over 20 countries. So we were very heartened because some of these live streaming, because of the time zone, actually took place at awkward timings for some of the viewers, but people really wanted to tune in. And in fact, one of our colleagues actually said that she and her husband, for the Casa Bayo episode, they poured themselves 2 glasses of red wine, they played music, and they watched this as their date night. So yeah, I think we're all getting really creative, and live streaming can really help bridge that gap in terms of discovery and even perhaps a bookable experience. Now, closer to home, we also did a series of interactive live stream sessions with one of our F&B merchants called Durian Edition. I wanted to do a poll on how many people eat durian, but I felt like, okay, that's maybe not that meaningful. So we actually took users through a 1-hour segment on how to spot, how to appreciate the best durians. We had a live giveaway. And through this, we actually drove at least a 10x increase in daily bookings versus the regular days. You can see the reach and engagement numbers there on screen. And what we learned is that the use of limited giveaways actually really helped to drive engagement and views for live streaming. Having quizzes and polls a lot more interactive, so that helps to really spike comments, and that helps to also push shareability, right, and engagement on Facebook, and the constant shout out or giveaway mechanics and promos actually help viewers to tune in along the way and not zone out. So you've got to really make it very two-way and very interactive rather than just kind of one-way receiving information. So in times of great uncertainty, consumers will put their trust in brands that give them confidence. And when a recent brand trust survey from one of the leading global PR firms actually showed that people will remember how brands respond to the pandemic. Consumers today, they want to see brands leading with empathy, and ultimately, brands that remain accessible, open, consistent, they will continue to win consumer trust. And at Klook, we have capitalized on the marketing channels we have built to consistently win the hearts of our consumers. So we will look at search trends, we will engage with people on social media, and we even go on what we call dark social, which are actually closed community groups to better understand consumer psyche, to help us anticipate and to improve the brand offerings that will meet the clearly evolving needs of today.
Thanks, Marcus. So before we go into the last section about product, we've come to the last poll for this session. We're quite curious to know about this one actually. Could we have the next question up, please? Yeah, so in the last 3 months, has your business developed a new product catered specifically to local consumers? This one's quite simple, yes or no. So we'll just give everybody a bit more time. A gentle reminder that if you have any questions for Marcus, we'll be answering them quite shortly. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. Okay, I think we can go straight to the poll results. Okay, so it's a very close match for this one, it seems. 60% have actually already created new products catered specifically to local consumers, but 40% have answered no. So I think, Marcus, you can go into the next section, which will cover off a little bit more on this topic about product.
Yeah, actually, I'm not surprised to see that it's almost 50-50. And I think it's because there are many challenges facing a lot of different businesses. So some business, it's not that easy to create a new product, right? Especially in the last few months where say a lot of people were on work from home, especially during the circuit breaker. Some businesses, they are also wondering, will a travel corridor open up? What will be the restrictions given? So with a lot of this uncertainty and moving conditions, I can understand that it might be difficult. So in the next few slides, I think we'll share some examples of how we managed to do that actually fairly easily, so that you don't have to think that creating a new product means radically overhauling my entire business model. I just wanted, before we go on to the next slide, that the term "we are tourists in our country" is something that speaks out to us a lot, because addressing the consumer preference between a local consumer and a tourist is very different. So basically, as locals, even though we are touring our own country, I think what we are looking for is completely different from what a regular inbound tourist would look for. So Singaporeans need to be re-inspired by local offerings. I think that's a fact. There's no such thing as a top 10 checklist to explore the country, and a lot of the experiences and stories we have are multifaceted, beyond just a straightforward attraction. If today we are going, to a particular country for holiday, chances are we'll probably be, I only have one day here, I need to do the top 5, right? Tick, tick, tick. But in Singapore, it's completely different. It doesn't work that way. There are many weekends for people to explore, and we all think that we actually know our own country to an extent. So I think things like events, food, arts and culture, even value, these are great pillars to anchor and to connect and get consumers excited. So I'll share a couple of examples next. So at the end of the day, being able to understand what makes Singaporeans tick is actually crucial in driving business recovery and sales. So here I put in 3 things. Number 1 is value add. Everyone loves a good bargain, and bargain actually does not need to necessarily mean discount. Number 2, the ability to support local pride and businesses. And number 3, to launch new creative local packages. And I'll share 3 brief examples on how we utilize these principles to create or augment our products. So in this example, we bundled a free $3 Gong Cha voucher together with our shared ferry transfer services between Singapore and some of the neighboring islands such as St. John, Lazarus, and Kusu Island. Now, such value adds, right, even though they are small, you'll be surprised. They can go a long way, not just psychologically, but also in terms of overall customer value. And this is also a great way for us to be able to cross-connect and support two different merchants by selling this one activity to a consumer that is looking to go, to one of these islands, but at the same time, another day possibly enjoying his or her Gong Cha. The second case study I wanted to share is that of our disappearing trades tour. So this is a curated tour focusing on historical trades in Singapore, such as coffee roasting, bread making. Now, unlike regular tourist-focused tours, this was something that actually got quite a bit of traction both ways, as locals themselves appreciated how this wasn't just a typical tourist hotspot, but it really dug deeper behind the scenes into the stories, the heritage, and the process, almost to the point of being like vintage hipster, if you ask me. And the content that we created, the videos, they resonated really well with both locals and some of our inbound customers prior to that. And the third case study, and this was very recent, is the AJ Hackett No Scream or Ice Cream Challenge. So we work with AJ Hackett. So that's the bungee tower that's in Sentosa. If you haven't done it, you should do it. Really awesome. We issued a No Scream challenge to celebrate the reopening of the attraction. Now, anyone who successfully jumps without screaming will get the next jump free. But even if you scream, which is very, very likely, you will get a free ice cream. So what we really did here was, we didn't just reduce the price to drive local volume, but, we came up with a creative spin. We challenged people. We put this as a social challenge online. And then we also introduced, new packages that to complement some of this, like bungee, Skybridge, F&B vouchers, to really attract Singaporeans. So I think these are three examples on how you can evolve your product. You don't have to recreate it from scratch, but that really provides a sense of novelty as well to your customers. So this is actually my last slide. I think travel has become such an integral part of many people's lives, and it will be here to stay. The road ahead will be challenging, but we collectively have the opportunity now to define our new future ahead and the world of travel and how experiences will look like. So, with that, I urge everyone to stay safe, stay agile, let's work together, and I am sure that travel will resume slowly but surely, starting with domestic first. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Marcus. So with that, we'll go into the Q&A session. I'll stop the screen share for a while and take a look at some of the questions that have come in. But before that, Marcus, I think it's a common question that many of our attendees would have. What is one word of advice on how smaller companies on a shoestring budget should market and reach out to consumers in this environment?
Well, I think there's no real simple answer, but I want to put across one point, which is the fact that the playing field is actually now leveled. And why I say this is because in let's say good times, right? Like I call it good times because previously we didn't have to deal with the pandemic. I think everyone, big brands especially, they had bigger budgets to be able to do digital marketing, do brand building. But this pandemic has really forced everyone to go back to basics and to really have to connect with consumers in a more innovative way. So use your agility to your advantage in this level playing field. Research the market, understand your audience, and then from there, you can use the data to segment, to tailor your offerings accordingly and be very targeted. You've heard the story about like David versus Goliath as well. I think in times like that, especially, creativity, agility, innovation will go a much longer way than having to, pull a very strong punch that takes a very long time with a lot of resources to activate. So that would be my one piece of advice to the smaller companies.
Okay, thanks very much for that. We'll move on to the next question. There have been studies indicating that luxury travel will resume first, given the perceived higher costs in travel post-COVID-19. Would this then have a correlation to the millennial travelers you mentioned, i.e. millennial travelers who have higher disposable income, either self-earned or from their parents? Yeah. So would these more affluent millennial travelers be the first to emerge from the COVID-19 situation?
Well, I feel like there are a few parts to this question that we need to address, because while travel is an outlet for people to discover, to be entertained, to have fun, I think we cannot neglect the fact that the pandemic has also resulted in a lot of economic loss as well. So that itself will be a trade-off whereby, you know, a lot of people may not want to adopt something that's super extravagant or luxurious, because they also want to be a lot more cautious. So I think rather than saying that affluent travel or, you know, high disposable income millennials will be the ones to go out first, I think it's more about how brands actually demonstrate the concept of value. And some of the terms that we have also been talking about internally at Klook is the concept of like affordable luxury. What does that mean, right? I mean, your experience can be luxurious. It does not need to be, you know, like a one-star hotel or something that's really shabby. How do you package it, but make it affordable at the same time? How do you then also give some flexibility? I think this value will go a longer way than just going after one particular segment that we think will recover first, just using, you know, affluence as one data point in the context of what's happening today.
Okay. Okay, we have a question about older travelers. So I think this person is curious about the options for older travelers in their 50s in the next 6 months. So any views on demographics in particular?
I think the ability to connect to older travelers is quite important. So unlike, you know, younger millennials, young adults, I think the adoption curve for older folks, especially on technology, would be a lot slower, and that is actually a little bit more difficult also for brands to reach out to them in the absence of, you know, certain traditional brick and mortar touch points that they perhaps may be a lot used to. So I think it will have to be a balance on how, you know, we always have this saying internally that actually sometimes when we target families, the moms and dads are not really the main audience. If you are able to target the kids are the ones that tell the mom and dad that they want to do this, right? So don't be so fixated that I have to only target the older traveler. Don't forget, these people, these moms, these dads, grandmas, they have family as well. So are you actually able to target their family, right? Or the people in their ecosystem, to remind them that when was the last time you brought your parents out, you know, for a great meal? When was the last time you had a family experience together? So that's thinking from a different perspective to connect with these older travelers. And then on the product side of things is making sure that, you know, for older travelers, they probably want something that is slower paced. They probably have more time, so you don't have to compress everything into like a 1 hour experience, but they probably would want something that's a lot more intimate, a lot more measured. They don't need something that's so dynamic. So perhaps as part of the itinerary, there could be, you know, afternoon tea where you sit down, you enjoy your conversation. I think that the ability to tailor the product to the older travelers is also quite important.
I mean, just to add on to that, on the marketing front, to your question, what you mentioned earlier about your mom asking you about TikTok. I think we've actually seen a shift in the consumer behavior as well, right? With even people from the older generation learning how to use live stream during this period. So I think COVID has actually kind of like forced or accelerated the change for some of these newer marketing technologies that we are seeing. Okay.
Yeah, indeed. And I just wanted to add that yeah, you know, one interesting thing that I picked up during the circuit breaker was I read news, and I also heard from people around that, you know, older people, especially the elderly, they because they can't go out, they can't possibly watch, you know, free to air TV every day as well. So a lot of them actually openly ask family members, can you teach me how to surf the net? How do I go to this Netflix, right? You know, things like that. So I think the adoption curve, to your point, has been accelerated. Now is how to make it a little bit less intimidating for them to be able to consume, and then also, you know, connect with them in a more personal way eventually.
Yep. Okay, we have a question about the domestic market. So Singapore is very different, obviously, from other countries whereby, you know, the domestic market is a little bit smaller. So do you think that for Singapore, our domestic market is enough to support dyeing suppliers?
For this, right, I think it's important to differentiate actually domestic versus local for local. And that's an internal term that we use at Klook. Now, why I say that is because if you are looking like at a country like, say, Thailand. Now, Thailand's a lot bigger, right? Someone living in Bangkok can go to Phuket, they can go to Pattaya. To them, that is domestic travel because they actually also have to leave their homes, book a hotel in Pattaya, right? Or if they go to, you know, Chiang Mai, they actually have to take a domestic flight. That is a form of domestic travel. But in Singapore, it's technically not domestic travel because it's more local for local, where you can technically get from one point to another in Singapore in less than an hour. And because of that, the way brands market to people cannot really take on just a travel angle. So you need to think about frequency. Can people do these activities, weekly, monthly? And if they do that, are they doing it alone? Can it be, mooted as something that they can do as a couples activity, right? And then how to stack that together with high frequency verticals or partners like, food, dining. So if you are able to shift and engineer your mentality that way, then you realize that while we do not have the volume and the geographical kind of breadth to do domestic travel, but the depth is actually very varied. And that's what I would urge everyone on this call, if you are a business owner, to try and think in that direction, rather than thinking, oh, we only have X million of population, and this means that there's very little thing for people to do. Country is very small. That would be the wrong way to approach this conversation.
Okay. Then the next group of questions is around staycations. So I'll maybe ask you this question in two parts. Firstly, I think there've been a couple of surveys where some Singaporeans are still very reluctant to do staycations. We have a specific question around whether you feel families are actually ready to do staycation. Yeah,
I think families would want to do staycations probably more in terms of occasion. So what I mean by that would be closer to maybe the school holidays or certain long weekends, because it's quite difficult for them to actually coordinate schedules among multiple people, unlike, let's say, young couples or even if you want to do your own solo staycation. So I think we have to look at the occasion, and I think the needs of the family travelers are also very different. So when they do staycations, they are probably looking for staycations in a property that has neighboring activities or attractions for the kids to do, space for the kids to run, to play, versus maybe a couple whereby in the past they could easily take short trips, but now they can't. They don't mind doing a staycation in a more urban property because they're not interested in going to a theme park or a playground. What they want to do is to have a good meal. They maybe want to chill in the room, order room service. They want to maybe catch a movie later. So the needs are very different, and hence I think that the message and the way the product is created in terms of like the highlights have to be very tailored towards the audience that we want to go after.
Okay. The next question I think is asking around for hotels that are still serving as dedicated government facilities, because we know that a number of hotels are still being used for stay home or quarantine purposes. How would you advise on charting content and messaging, given that live stream, for example, may be out of bounds during the current situation?
So just to understand the question, is the question that for hotels that are currently being used for stay home purposes, how do we market these hotels for the future?
How do we prepare, when it's time when the stay home ends and people can actually rebook the hotel? Like, how do you make sure that, I guess, your facility is not forgotten? Yeah.
I think one thing these hotels and brands can do is they can start to prepare content, and content does not necessarily need to be something that you only start filming now. I'm sure a lot of these establishments had previously created videos or pictures, and you can stitch them together to tell a more compelling story. So if you can look at your asset bank and look at what you've done in the past, always reuse and repurpose. You don't have to create from scratch. That's number one. So the preparation phase can happen now. Number two is, I think it's important and for these properties to really help consumers understand, let's say, the cleaning process or what has some of the certification been done in the conversion from stay home purposes to being consumer friendly later. Because in times like that, I don't think people are just skeptical, but I think they don't know what they don't know. So the more information you can put out, the more you are able to demonstrate that when we say that the rooms are thoroughly clean, this is how it's done. I think that goes a long way versus just putting a one-liner that says our rooms are thoroughly clean, right? So I think demonstrating that is something that these properties can think of. And then last but not least, I would like to say that staycation is a very unique product because it's actually not selling a dry room at a cheap rate. Staycation has many aspects to it, like telling the consumer that what you're actually buying is not a room, but you are buying an experience itself that's out of home. It's peace of mind. And part of your staycation also has a great meal for two. It has a spa package. It has the ability for you to take 10 steps and go to a beach. I think if you are able to create that story in terms of what you're trying to sell, staycation will then go a long way versus just saying, oh, we are selling our rooms at 40% off, because people won't get what they're actually trying to purchase.
Okay, so we're in the last 5 minutes of the webinar. So apologies if we can't get to all your questions, but we'll do our best to try to address as many as possible. Maybe the last question, which I find is quite an interesting question as well, related to one of the trends that you mentioned just now, Marcus. So does the rise of solo travelers actually hold true for domestic travel?
I think it's true. And why I say that is because this thing about solo travel, it was already evident before the pandemic. So when we did our surveys, we found that people wanted me time, self-discovery, wanted a break away from the hustle and bustle. So with the pandemic, I think that has accelerated the need, for things like social distancing that we've all heard about. I think, people would generally feel a lot safer if they were in an environment that had less people. But we also need to tailor the needs of a solo traveler to the experience that we're offering. So what I mean by that is, it's not just saying, for example, I allow you, you know how we have these activities like the escape room where you go inside and you escape, but just saying like I have a solo package is kind of lame in my opinion, because like why would you go and solve a puzzle by yourself, right? So instead, how can you create the product to suit somebody who might want to do it by themselves, rather than just taking your existing product which was meant for groups and then slapping it on and say, here's a solo package, you can go in by yourself. So yeah. I thought that was an example that came to my head.
Okay, very, very valid point. I think it really depends on the type of experience that you're already offering and whether it makes sense for your overall business. Okay, with that, I think there have been a few questions asking for the slides for from today's session. So the recordings will actually be uploaded, and I think we will be triggering a message to all attendees. So you can rewatch the recording and take a look at the slides there again. Yeah, so with that, I will just share this final form where we would like to hear some of your feedback on today's session. So please feel free to drop us any feedback that you have, anything else that you would like to hear from us. Please feel free to scan the QR code or go to the bit.ly link there again. So apologies again for not being able to answer all the questions. I do see some queries that we need to follow up on. Nick from Tiger Brewery Tour, hello. We will try to reach out to you again after this session. But otherwise, thank you everybody again for joining us. This was the second session in the STB and Klook webinar series. And I hope you guys have a very good Thursday ahead. Yeah, thank you so much.